Thank you guys for joining. We're gonna wait for a few minutes for more people to start coming in, so just hang tight. All right, so we're gonna get started. Thank you guys all for joining us today. So this event is hosted by Ally, which stands for Asian Youth Liberty League, and we're a student-run nonprofit based in California. And our goal is to, allow more Asian American teenagers and young people to be involved in politics, learn, give back to the community and grow as individuals, as a team. And if you have been with us for our past events, we have held workshops and speaker events, inviting local politicians, candidates, panels, debates, and today we have a wonderful student joining us. And in the we have many branches located across California, expanding to other parts of the country as well. We have branches in urban control. If you would like to stay connected, join a branch, I'm going to be putting a link right now in the chat, and you're welcome to click on the link, and just going to have all the information to join each branch and stay connected. And this year we're using Slack and also Facebook to really, create this community of young people. It's very important that you join those Slack channels, because that's the way you can, talk to people, stay connected, ask questions, and to be kept up to date with future events. And just FYI, Ally used to Future Chinese Leaders of America, but we changed it to really to be more inclusive of other Asian Americans. So I'm going to drop the link right now in the chat, and I'll pass it over to Julie to introduce our speaker for today. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. So today we have a very special guest speaker with us, California State Controller Betty Yee. State Controller Yee is a member of the Democratic Party who has served as the California State Controller since 2015, elected in November of 2014. Re-elected for a second term as controller in 2018, Ms. Yee is only the 10th woman in California history to be elected to statewide office. State Controller Yee previously served as a member of the California Board of Equalization from 2014 to 2015. As the state's chief fiscal officer, Ms. Yee previously served as chief deputy director for budget with the California Department of Finance, where she led the development of the governor's budget, negotiations with the legislature, key budget stakeholders, and fiscal analysis of legislation. Please join me in welcoming State Controller Yee.
Great. Thanks, Julie. Thanks, Amy. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm really thrilled to be with you this afternoon. And first, thank you for convening and just really thinking about your own leadership journey. This is a really important time, I think, all communities to think about how we can each do more and step up to the challenges of the time. So I'm just very thrilled to be here. What I thought I'd do this afternoon is just give you a little bit about my background and my history, how I got involved in politics, and then really talk about the challenges that are facing all communities today and how I really feel Asian Americans have a lot to offer in terms of some of the solutions that we're going to need to work on together. So, just by way of background, I'm a first-generation American. I was born and raised in San Francisco to immigrant parents who came from Guangdong province in China. And, this is a typical, pretty common immigrant story. But I think one of the things I want to say about this is that we ought not feel any shame about our background, that this is something that we should really give more voice to, particularly here in California, where we have a minority majority in California now, soon to be overtaken as the majority are Latinx population. And so I'm just really, every day that I wake up, I'm just really proud of the fact that we're here in California, where we truly embrace diversity as a strength and not a threat. And so, as I think about my own journey, I'm the oldest of 6 children, second oldest of 6 children. And my parents had a laundry and dry cleaning business when we were growing up. And again, a very common immigrant experience. Neither of my parents had much educational attainment in China. And so when my father first came here on his own, he ran the laundry business in San Francisco Chinatown, and actually enlisted in the United States Army during the Second World War, and became naturalized as a citizen. And this is a history that I think has become a lot more known in the recent years. But again, that's something that my father talked a lot about. I would say a lot of his contemporaries from his generation really didn't give voice to that history, but a very, very important part of the history of America in terms of the API community and its growth here in the United States. Growing up, we were poor. There were 6 kids, and we all were the best, probably the best workers in the family business, and we just did everything to get by. A lot of sacrifices my parents made, and to this day, my mother's still alive. She's 97 years old, and was able to see all 6 of their kids go through college, and several have advanced degrees. But this is really the beauty of our immigrant story. And today, when we talk to our immigrant communities, so much of it is around barriers to how our immigrant communities can achieve pretty similar experiences, whether it be being able to start their own businesses to support their families, going to college and being able to afford higher education, to the ability to just have a livelihood that now has been threatened by this pandemic and our recession that we're in today. And I would say, in terms of my experience in politics, my parents were not political at all. If anything, I think my exposure to politics was about being an advocate for them. Neither my mother or my father were fluent in English, and I think for some of us here this afternoon, and I know many in my generation, we served as an advocate for our parents, because on many occasions we served as the translator for them, whether we were interfacing with government, with our neighbors. In my case, my experience with looking at how we, excuse me, let me just fix volume.
Oh, Missy, I think you might be muted.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, good, thank you. I apologize. So in my case, just growing up, my orientation to politics was really when I was 13 years old. I was an advocate for the 4 Chinese American families in my neighborhood, all of whom had small businesses. But my younger sister was going to be in the first class to be bused across the city in the school desegregation program in San Francisco. And I was tasked by the 4 Chinese American families to be a spokesperson for them at the local school board town hall meeting, and just to tell the school board, we don't oppose the busing program, but we have our own businesses, we don't drive, and we have to be open 6-7 days a week to provide for our families, and we have an elementary school that's just within walking distance. And so if anything should happen to our children, if they're bused across the city, we would have to get on public transportation for well over 2 hours to be able to bring our child home in the case of an emergency. And I remember I was 13 years old getting in front of the school board to make this statement, And I was so nervous, and I went back to my seat in the auditorium, and the busing program actually did get underway, and it lasted for the better part of the next 30 plus years. And so it was fine. My sister was fine. I'm not sure that the schools ended up being any better integrated as a result of the program, but that experience just left an impression in me that I was a voice for someone. And I think for anyone interested in politics, I would say that it's not about all of those nasty, ugly things that you read about in the newspaper about what politics is. Obviously, it's gotten, the tenor of it and the discourse has gotten to be much more negative. But at the very heart of it, it's about people and how we make a difference in people's lives and how we look at speaking up for those who don't have a voice yet. And it's so important when we think about in each of our lives, just different opportunities when we've had an opportunity to stand up for others, looking at calling out injustice when we see it. And being sure that everyone who is able to just be heard, particularly through voting, is able to register to vote and actually votes. And so I'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. But as I went through my adult life, that one experience at 13 years old stayed with me. And when I began to look at just where there were opportunities open for people and where there were opportunities that were closing for people, became very clear to me that my experience, not only working my family business and taking care of the books, but really having a passion for how resources are allocated and working with money and numbers. And it became clear that one of the most important things that I could become involved with is our decisions around the allocation of resources. And that's true in our own lives. It's true whether you're in the private sector, looking at the bottom line for a company. It's certainly true in the work that I do as the controller of the state of California. It is about being sure that our dollars are being spent in the best way possible to be sure that we are serving the most public need and gaining the most public benefit. And so, as I look at my career and how I've decided to focus on that, it's also become very clear to me that there are very few people who look like us doing this work. And I think that's something that is a personal passion of mine, to be sure that, and doesn't necessarily mean running for office, although I hope some of you here today have thoughts about doing that. But it is also about different ways of serving, so that we know that as we look at being sure that our communities are voting, being sure that our communities are being heard and respected and taken seriously when our issues and concerns really are setting us back in terms of being able to advance and be full participants in this economy, to be able to support our families and to be able to attend quality schools and to have economic opportunities. These are all things that really require that we continue to elevate our voice as a community, and to be sure that we have leaders who look like us, who are going to understand those voices, and more importantly, work with other leaders across different communities to be sure that we are doing the best that we can with the resources that we have. And so, as controller, I'll just explain that with respect to what I do, it is the CFO of the fifth largest economy in the world. My job is about overseeing the state's finances, and they have been challenged recently, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But it is about being sure that there is true transparency and accountability about what happens with our tax dollars. I also audit every state payment that is made to be sure that the dollars are going to the right place and also are authorized from the right account. I prepare the financial statements for the state of California. I also do the payroll for over 250,000 state employees and employees of the California State University system. And also with respect to the financial oversight of the state's finances, I also have about, 70 different boards and commissions on which I have a seat that dictates policy, from public pensions to tax policy to environmental policy in terms of how we manage our state lands, and also a number of different financing authorities that provide grants and loans to different types of initiatives in the transportation, education, and healthcare area. So I mentioned these times and where we find ourselves, and I am just heartened by the fact that all of you are spending a Saturday afternoon coming together to talk about kind of your trajectory in terms of your leadership ascension and where you see yourselves and your place in this world today. And I do want to talk a little bit about the pandemic and COVID-19. and what that's meant for California, which prior to the pandemic, we are, and I believe we still are, the 5th largest economy in the world. We had a diverse economy. We have obviously the diversity of our people, the diversity of our regions in California really spoke about how the strength of an economy that has reached throughout the rest of the world. And when the pandemic hit, what we really began to see surface was just how vulnerable our economy has been. We have had over 9 million Californians now collect unemployment benefits since the pandemic began. We know that even before the pandemic and then the recession that was induced by the pandemic, that prior to all of this, that about a third of our workforce in California made $15 an hour or less. And that's not sustainable when you think about, long-term economy. Many of those workers work in low-wage service sector jobs, and pretty much a good part of that service sector has been wiped out by this recession. And so as we talk about how we're going to rebuild this economy, I think there are so many opportunities to be creative, but also intentional about how we stabilize really the foundation of this economy, particularly for those workers who've been caught in such a vulnerable situation, not being able to provide for their families. The additional $600 a week in unemployment benefits provided by the federal government expired yesterday. And so we know that those numbers are just going to keep growing in the weeks to come until there's more relief provided. And then also we see, and I think this is really important when we think about leadership, because we also see that what's been happening is just a lot of anger, unrest that has started to boil over because we've not really dealt with some of these underlying issues, over the course of decades, and some would even argue centuries. That this whole movement that we're seeing towards trying to achieve racial justice and equality has really started to further unveil just some of the policies that were promised but never fulfilled, particularly to our Black American community. That for all the rights and all the protections that they've been able to gain from the Emancipation Proclamation declaring the end of slavery, to the Civil Rights Act, through the Voting Rights Act, and obviously much attention focused on that with the passing of Congressman John Lewis, and also at the same time commemorating the 100th year anniversary of the 19th Amendment that allows women the right to vote. So we see all of that kind of converging together, and what we are really taking stock of now, and I hope all of you are in your own way as well, is just seeing that where history has brought us is really a place where we're finding ourselves really answering some of the same questions that have been posed previously. That for all of the protections and gains that have been made, that the economic promises that were to follow really were not provided for so many of our communities. And even within our own API community, we have very much disproportionately affected communities, particularly with our Southeast Asian communities, underrepresented communities, including our Filipino Americans. And so, we're not immune from that. And I think one of the things I just want to share with you and impress upon you as we think about our own leadership is that we can't think about leadership in a vacuum. That leadership is very much a part of not just knowing about our own identity and our own history, but to understand that of others. And I think one of the things that I know I've been doing a lot of is just a lot of listening and a lot of learning about the Black American experience, and certainly the history of Black Americans, and really the only population. And I do try to really steer away from conversations where people want to compare various struggles across communities, because I will say that the Black Lives Matter movement and why Black Lives Matter, and until we have Black Lives Matter, that all lives will not matter. And that's the fact that this is the only population the only community aside from our Native Americans whose history has really been about enslavement. From the very beginning when they set foot here on our shores, that this has been about a history of enslavement. And so when you think about the economic gains that were promised but never delivered to this community, and how we're still talking about those today, that still is a form of enslavement. And so as I've been listening and learning about some of the key events of the Black American community, what has been astounding to me is how much of that history is not written, how much of that history is not taught, even in African American studies, how much of that history is now through the eyes of those who decide to go back and take a look at it, and not necessarily from the descendants of those who were hurt, by those chapters of history. And so I think it's very, very important in terms of our own history of our diverse API communities that we're in touch with that we are the ones who give voice to that because it is our history, and that we look at how we are grounded in our own history in order to be able to look at the experiences of others who are different from us. And that's really my great hope and promise, as we move forward, and particularly with our young leaders, with you as young leaders here, that there is really more of an openness to look at that. Because I will tell you, I'm not so sure. I mean, my mother's kind of an exception, but I will say that generations who came before us are not much interested in that. I think that as we talk about why we are having this strong sense of unrest, we're seeing a lot more young people, protesting, joining in protests on the streets. We're seeing many more diverse communities taking to the streets, and that's because I think all of you and each of you rightfully are trying to claim this future that you should. That frankly, I think I and some of my predecessors have kind of screwed up because we have not taken the time to really understand who we are. And I will say that with this election coming up this November, the one ballot measure that I'm going to be working my heart out over is Proposition 16 to lift the ban on affirmative action. And this is something that should not be viewed as a threat, but really an acknowledgement that we have had government sanctioned discrimination. That for me, and I know Oliver, you go to Cal Berkeley, but the whole reverse discrimination movement actually started while I was still at Cal, to where Prop 209 was passed, and I've been able to serve on the Alumni Association at Cal for over 6 years, and the reason I did that was to go back and raise money for scholarships to try to bring more diversity to campus. That we had Native American, Black American, Latino American students admitted on their own merits, but who chose not to come to Berkeley because there weren't many others who looked like them, and that they felt that there wasn't going to be a supportive community for them. And I thought that was really a shame, that we needed to really fix that and try to bring more people who look different from us on campus. People always used to ask me, what was the thing that you learned the most about at Cal? What were your favorite subjects? And I said I had a lot of favorite subjects, but really what I learned at Cal was how to live. And that, to be able to be on a campus that really was a microcosm of the world, and to meet people from all different backgrounds, and, people who looked so very, very different from me and had such different experiences from me, was really the richness of how I became more in touch with, who I am, and certainly about the world in which we live. So I'm just going to end by saying this, because as we talk about, particularly this year with the election, with a heightened focus on voting, with looking at, and I think for all of you, what I would say is, and I don't believe it's going to be true with this group at all, but there's always a lot of speculation about where our young people are, that they tend to be transient in terms of voting, and that unless their candidate is on the ballot, that they likely are going to sit it out. And I'm just going to end by saying this. We have movements and struggles, as I said, celebrating the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment, the women's suffrage movement that really saw many women on the forefronts, that protests that became very violent. Some women died as a result of this movement. But what happened after women were accorded the right to vote? Not all women could vote. Black women were not able to vote until after the Civil Rights Act. And so I think what we're reminded of, and particularly with the reflections of so many in the celebration of the life of the late John Lewis, is this, that, for every movement and struggle, yes, there's something to celebrate in terms of rights and protections that are gained, but the fight is never over. It's never complete, because how we expand those rights to others and to new communities, how we protect those rights from being stripped away from us, continues to require our sustained vigilance. And I think for all of you who are here to think about, your own leadership, how you're going to be, really be the faces of this generation coming up that really cares about, opportunities, not just for your generation, but for, those that are going to be following after you. That this is so important to know that the work is never done. And so I'm just going to stop here to say, when I think about my own leadership trajectory, it has to always have a tie to those who are going to be serving and leading after me. To know that we're passing the baton, and that it's not just passing the baton in terms of who's going to serve, who's going to lead, who's going to be the next state controller from our community, but also about who's going to continue that fight. And I think all of us just need to understand that, when I think about certainly my 97-year-old mother and how she finally registered to vote when I first began to run for office, she wanted to vote for me, right? But she had a green card all her life. But what made her decide to become a naturalized citizen was because of all of this immigrant bashing that was starting to happen. And she began to be really fearful about the fact that because she had a green card, that she wasn't going to be considered someone who belonged in this country. And so she was very motivated to become naturalized. And I think for all of us, we have to be the voices for our immigrant communities, whether they are documented or undocumented. They are part of the fabric of America. And so we have just tremendous work to do, but I'm also very hopeful because of leaders like you who are already thinking about, what is my place, what is my responsibility, and more importantly, what am I going to do to serve and to lead so that we can be sure that we have a world, that we have a state where there are going to be opportunities created that will bring all communities to the fore, and that some of these policies and of discrimination that we've had in the past are not going to be there in the future, and that we really can be ever the stronger for it. So thank you for having me. I hope I gave you just a little bit of a glimpse about the work that I do, but certainly the work that we're going to be doing together. And if there's one hope that I would say that I'm going to be continuing to work on, and that is I would really like to see just tremendous progress on attaining true racial equity and justice. And a lot of that has to be intentional, and a lot of that has to be about not just knowing ourselves, but being sure that we understand the history of our diverse brothers and sisters in the state and around the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. E. And I'm pretty sure that's an inspiration for a lot of people, especially Asian Americans wanting to go into politics because they feel discouraged because we are considered a minority in the politics field.
Right.
Thank you.
Right. Exactly.
Hi. Here are just some questions from the
Okay.
audience that we have prepared, and I will share my screen right now. Okay. So the first question from the audience is, I think you have answered this question already, but I think you didn't answer how it was difficult for you as a female politician to enter politics.
Yes. It's difficult. I'm going to be very honest. I think it's gotten better. So, first of all, as I mentioned, I didn't think I would ever run for office. But I have a particular discipline. My background's in public finance and tax. And so I've been doing this for, it's going, over 35 years now. But, as I think about, what led to my decision to run for office. And it's a very personal decision. So if any of you are interested in running for office, you will know when that time is. And there are many, many programs now that are available that can help prepare API candidates to run for office, and certainly women to run for office. They were not around when I thought about running for office. And so, the biggest challenges for any woman running for office is just being taken seriously. that can we measure up to the guys, right? It's still very much predominantly dominated by men, still very much dominated by, frankly, white men. And
Yeah.
so
I actually watched one of your interview, and you said you just have to keep asking like a lot of times, so they'll take you seriously.
exactly. So, but here's one thing I'm really challenged to do. There are many more women now running, and I think in 2018, after this current president was in office for a couple of years, we saw the highest number of women running for offices at all levels throughout this country, about 4,000 of them altogether. About half of them won their seats, but another half now have experience running, and so they're now running campaigns. They're actually part of the infrastructure of helping other women get elected. And so I think part of the challenge is just finding that your consultants, your fundraisers who are actually going to be able to work with women candidates better, who understand the needs and the demands of women in terms of their candidacies. And so, but the other challenge I will say is, how do we change the dynamic of, how we measure viability? Right now, the sole measure of viability, I would say, or the most important measure of viability as a candidate is how much money you can raise. And when I ran, I did not raise the most money. I raised enough, but I also knew that I was the most qualified candidate. And so I think we have to talk about viability in terms of what candidates bring to the table. And particularly for women, we tend to underestimate and don't give value to all of the experiences that we have had. It doesn't have to be necessarily professional work experience, because let's face it, women weren't always part of the working economy. It can be about community and civic engagement. It can be about experience honed as a small business owner. It can be experience honed as a parent. Or it could be an experience as a parent or a caregiver, of somebody with a disability. So I mean, these are all things that we tend to not give value to, and certainly give voice to, that I think could make for some very, very interesting dynamics as a candidate, because those are your own experiences. Nobody can take that away from you, and you can speak from a place of experience as a result of it. And so I think one of the challenges still is how women have to change the metrics about what constitutes viability as a successful candidate.
Can you explain what viability is?
Yeah, if you're a serious candidate, it means if you haven't raised enough money, you're probably not going to win. If you haven't gotten the endorsements of the major newspapers, you probably aren't going to be viable. If you don't have other elected officials endorsing your campaign at the highest levels, you're probably not going to make it. So it really speaks to the success of your run as a candidate. So and as I said, those are all the typical things, but I think there are many, many other things that actually could make it more successful. When you're running for a local office, I always say to candidates, your best asset is going to be being sure you get in front of as many people as possible, because you get to tell your own story about your background and your experience. And at the end of the day, it doesn't matter how much money you have to raise enough to get your name out there and your message out there. But at the end of the day, it's the vote. It's that one, every single vote counts. So as much as you can get everyone to know about you and to turn that contact into a vote, that's what we're really about in terms of a successful candidacy. So and what I'm just going to say, it's not always about the money, and it's not necessarily always about the messaging. It's going to be about how you put yourself out there, being authentic, being true to talking about your background and experience, and how you talk about what you're going to do once you're in office, because what the office is about and how you're going to make a difference for your community.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think the true politician should be all for the people. So if they have the true messages that people want, as long as they have an amount of money that are able to put them in front of the people, they should be able to get a seat, because that's what their true passion is and what people actually want the policies to be passed by the politician they support.
Yeah,
right.
I think that's right. And yeah.
Oh, yeah, you can say it.
No, what I was going to say was, You know,
Uh-huh.
you're raising an issue which I think is really important.
Yeah.
Just because an election is over, and you know, and I
Mhm.
say this a lot. You know, my election was successful, but my
Mhm.
engagement with the voters and the people of California doesn't end. You now have to hold me accountable, and you know, this work is complicated. I probably am not going to always be taking positions that are in agreement with others, but I have to
Mhm.
stay true and be able to explain my positions. And so, you know, I think just being honest and upfront and frankly respectful, you know, to the your constituents is really important. And what I see happen, frankly, a lot more from time to time is that after people are elected, they tend to lose some of that. There's a lot of
Mhm.
groupthink in politics to where, you know, just
Mhm.
how you stand out as an individual with your own perspectives, with your own thoughts, which I really hope would happen more because you're representing a constituency that may be different than, you know, your colleague in a neighboring district. And so those are all things that I really look for in my colleagues with whom I serve.
Mhm. Thank you for doing this, and your constituent, which is Asians. Really thank you for doing this. Okay. Our next question is, I think you've talked about this, like how the COVID-19 affects like the people who are working class. How about can you expand on how the pandemic will affect everyone, not just the working class?
Yeah, no, it's having tremendous impacts, and where actually I want to go back to something that you said, Matthew, in terms of
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
my constituents. My
Yeah.
constituents is every 39 million people in California as a statewide official.
Uh,
So obviously,
okay.
obviously my
Uh-huh.
heart is with the API community. But I think part of the thing that I try to do in office is, you know, I'm very proud of the fact that I'm a Chinese American woman. And,
Yeah.
you know, it's very obvious when people see me who I am, what I am. But in terms of how I serve, it is definitely with my background, my experience, and my, you know, certainly identity as a Chinese American woman. But my constituents are really, you know, all 39 million Californians,
Yeah,
and that's
obviously.
important. No, but that's important from the perspective that you know, there are going to be issues where I'm gonna be out of sync with maybe, you know, the API community, but there's a reason for that. And it may mean that, you know, the community hasn't been exposed to, you know, a particular issue that we have to, you know, start paying attention to. It could be that we are divided within our own community about, you know, how we feel about a particular issue. So, you know, as a statewide official, I'm very in tune with, you know, just kind of where different constituencies are, because it informs the work that I do, certainly with respect to, you know, where the dollars go, and being sure that you know, those dollars are being directed appropriately. You know, and so this COVID-19 question is, it has had so many impacts on so many different levels. I did certainly talk about, you know, what it's done, what the pandemic-induced recession has done, but I want to talk about kind of the practicalities of what's happened in people's lives, because I see this every day with my staff of 1,500 in the controller's office. We have had to, just internal to our office, when the pandemic hit, we immediately allowed 2/3 of our staff team to telework, and another third do have to be on site for security reasons. And so we immediately changed how people are working. And remote work from home has been actually welcomed by some and has been very stressful for others. Because we also have, as you know, many of our young people not able to attend school and are receiving their classroom instruction at home online. And so that, coupled with, you know, parents working at home online and virtually, looking at maybe some who have to be home because they have to take care of a loved one who is part of a vulnerable group, susceptible to the virus. So it's really changed in terms of how we are living and working. It's changed in terms of how we are having to connect with one another. Obviously, the public health directives of practicing physical distancing and wearing masks has really radically changed, you know, our ability to connect with one another. And the other thing that I will say that how this has changed is I think it's really gotten everyone to be more aware of just how vulnerable and risky, kind of our economy and environment is. When we saw, for example, supply chains really start to, dry up. I mean, things like toilet paper and, meat and just, the basic things that we come to count on, at the very beginning of this pandemic. I think we took some of those things for granted, most of our lives. And that, in the society of abundance, we really began to see, shortages and just people and having to go without, frankly, some of those things. And I hope that's been kind of a nice life lesson, that we're not taking these things for granted, that we're not hopefully being, so wasteful, in terms of, the things that we have the ability to consume and to access. But the other way that I think the pandemic and the lasting part of this pandemic, and I do want to talk about this because we don't talk about this in our community very much at all. I have seen the stresses that the pandemic has created, not just for workers in the economy, certainly my own staff, because there are some of my staff actually like being in the office more, but because what they do for my team and for the operation is conducive to remote work. We are trying to keep as many people, out of the office and within proximity to one another as much as possible. But they miss that connection, they miss that interaction. And what I highlight a lot, and with my own team as well, is that when we get to this, the other side of this public health pandemic, of the actual coronavirus itself, hopefully with the discovery of a vaccine and being able to really, have lives and livelihoods restored. I hope that we don't end up in this pandemic of where we have this this pandemic of trauma. Mental health is a really important issue that we're not talking a lot about. And why I'm focused on this is because just access to mental health services is really difficult for all communities, because of the stigma that's still associated with it. And so, it's no surprise that we're seeing more people, really having more of a desire to be outdoors, because that affects your mental health. It's no surprise that we're seeing people turning to, planting vegetable gardens because they want to, have some connection with nature. And so what I want to say about this is I think each of us in our own way just need to figure out, how do we stay connected with those who we believe are going to be, just experiencing some more difficult challenges. Because they have a need to connect. And so I hope that, this whole idea about the pandemic of trauma doesn't become a reality. We also know, I do a lot of work in the domestic violence and sexual assault arena because I'm on the Victims' Compensation Board. And, for those who are victims of domestic violence and sexual assault, and yes, the majority are women, but also children. During this pandemic and where we've had shelter-in-place orders, this has been a really very, very difficult, unsafe time for them. And so I give voice to this because, frankly, you're not going to hear from them about it. They're living in trauma. And so I think it's important for us to really think about, as we talk about health generally, and particularly when we're focused on public health, that we don't forget about the mental health aspect of what this pandemic has also created.
Yeah, I totally agree. So the next question is how the working schedule and routine have changed. I think you've already talked about this. So how about we expand it a little bit? Can you provide some tips on how our mental health can have a better mental health during this quarantine? Because we're staying home. So what are the things that we can do to probably make us stay brighter instead of having trauma?
Yeah, so one of the things, I'll speak both from a personal standpoint, but also from just some things that I'm doing with my own team and my own family. Prior to the pandemic, we all have our own routines and, just kind of how our days proceed, and, we get to plan for our weekends and in some ways, no limits to, what we may be engaged in. Routine has become pretty much the reality for so many people now during the pandemic. So I think one of the things to think about is, what can you do every day? What can be something what aspect of every day can be something new? And in my particular case, I like reading, and so I like reading things that are very different from what I do at work. My husband and I have started vegetable gardening. We enjoy that. It's like, you know, when a zucchini comes out, it's like giving birth. It's really wonderful. It is, but also, you know, I have found myself, you know, we're all doing meetings on virtual platforms as we are today, and you know, remotely, even if we are in the office. But I talk about this a lot. We check up on each other. This is something that I hope becomes a really regular routine. And, you know, I talked about the mental health aspect earlier, but I think this is just as we would check up on a neighbor, we check up on each other. And I think that's very important to do. And it is, you know, because your routine has changed just by virtue of not having just that informal contact with people. You know, it's not that you interacted with them greatly every day in the office, but that, or at school, but that you just had like these casual interactions. And those have become, people really value those now and have talked about how valuable that is, and that they miss, you know, during this time. And so I think just, you know, trying to do everything you can to kind of break the routine, but have it be around, you know, how you connect with others, and have it be around discovery, you know, just something new, some new aspect that can be part of your day every day.
Yeah, just do something new and try to get used to the staying at home. So yeah, okay. Let's do a switch of topic. I think you talk about how your position on Prop 16, and this topic is really, really popular
Yes.
as of now, especially in the Chinese community. So can you give a more insight into why you support Prop 16?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I can. And certainly the second half of this question, I do want to speak to about how it affects the student population trying to get into college.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So first of all, let me just say, to me, if Prop 16 passes, I think it's going to really elevate our ability to get more slots funded in our public higher education institutions, not less. You know, the fight, in some ways, the opposition about this limiting opportunities for, you know, eligible Chinese American students, eligible, you know, white students getting into the university of their choice. You know, maybe in the short term because of funding issues, but frankly, it's the wrong question to ask. You know, we ought to be locked arms with our Latino community, our African American community, our Native American community, and insist on more slots being funded. I mean, here in California, the most diverse state in the United States, probably one of the most diverse states in the world. And we can't say with any confidence that anyone who has the ability to go to a first-rate public university should have the ability to go. And that ought to be what we fight for. And that is an investment that pays itself over and over again. And so I'm hopeful that when we lift the ban on affirmative action, that it will really bring communities together about, you know, how we fight for more opportunity, not less. I want to talk about something that one of my colleagues, who I really have tremendous respect for, Dr. Richard Pan, who's a state senator, talked about when ACA 5, which became Prop 16, was going through the legislature. He's a pediatrician by profession, and he ran for the state senate. And what he said, and I agree with this, and I did write a letter in support of ACA 5, which got Prop 16 on the ballot. And what he said was this: look, you know, Chinese Americans and Asian Americans may be able to get into the college of their choice, but that glass ceiling then hits us when we go out into our professions.
Oh.
How many Chinese American deans do you see of medical schools, schools of engineering, in the corporate boardrooms of our top Fortune 500 companies? You know, so, you know, in some ways, we're limiting ourselves when we look at banning affirmative action. And as I said earlier, within our own community, we have underrepresented and underserved communities just within our own API community, our Southeast Asian communities, our Filipino American communities, certainly our Pacific Islander communities. And so we have a lot of work to do here, but I think part of this is, you know, how do we change the paradigm and actually the question that we really ought to be focused on? This is not about closing off opportunities, it's about expanding opportunity. And I want to say one last thing. When I went back to serve on the Cal Alumni Association at UC Berkeley, the reason I wanted to get more Native American, Black, and Latino students on campus was this. I don't like reading about just anti-Semitic incidences on campus because that to me signals ignorance. And I truly also believe that there's a correlation, and I don't think this has been looked at closely, that when Prop 209 passed in California, that banned affirmative action, the less diverse that our public higher education institutions became, we saw more of these racial incidences and more of these anti-Semitic expressions. And to me, that was really a statement that by limiting the voices and the faces and the experiences that we were seeing on our public university campuses meant that there was just kind of this level of ignorance that crept in that began to really be a part of how students started to relate or frankly not relate to one another. And that's not, to me, a sign of how we advance as a society. And so this is pretty serious for me because you look at what's happening in the country today and the fact that white supremacy is on the rise and that our public institutions are contributing to that is really a shameful statement to me. So how it's going to affect the student population trying to get into college, I hope we just blow the enrollment numbers and the enrollment slots that are available for any eligible student that wants to get into a UC or CSU of their choice. Because here in California, we thrive on the fact that we have diversity among us. We thrive on the fact that we create the innovators that have impact around the world. And we thrive on the fact that when we are able to embrace diversity, it also speaks to the strength of our own economy being diverse. We're represented, we're lucky because APIs are represented in every aspect, every sector of our economy here in California. But we also, I think, can be ever the richer if we can see the same for our Latin community, Latino communities, and our Black community and Native American community.
Yeah, I think what you said is very important for the Chinese community to hear because the scope is college. I think a lot of people think that Prop 16 will only affect colleges, but I think what you just said proves that the Prop 16 will affect the life after college, which is companies, how the race can play, not just play part in universities, but into like future careers as well. So thank you for sharing that. The next question is...
It also, by the way, affects public contracting. So you could be a minority small business owner and not be able to compete with others to get government contracts. And that has been a real hindrance. So it's definitely got some economic implications if we don't lift the ban on affirmative action. We're just like completely cut off from even having the opportunity to compete. So we definitely want to reverse that.
Yeah. Our next question is a very less intense question. Did you know you wanted to pursue politics when you were in high school?
Oh my goodness, no.
Wait, Miss Yi, sorry, let me interrupt one sec. We know we had originally said this meeting goes till 4. We'd love to have you around for more time, but only if you have the time.
Yes, I do. No, I can see you have some more questions. I'm happy to answer them. So yeah, please.
Great, thanks so much.
So career, did I know what I wanted to do when I was in high school? No.
Yeah.
And probably like many of you, there were a lot of expectations that my parents had for me. My father, my parents, frankly, I'm the second oldest. My sister did go to college. Actually, of my 4 sisters and 1 brother, all of the sisters, my siblings, my sisters went to Cal Berkeley, and my brother went to San Francisco State. So, but my father had no aspirations of sending any of us to college. He couldn't afford it. And so he was poor. He would have been very happy. We graduated from high school, got a job. I mean, in my case, and for the girls in the family, becoming a secretary and, meeting somebody in our lives and marrying and starting a family. That was kind of the aspiration. I'd say my mother probably had, she was kind of the risk taker and really had higher aspirations for us should we want to pursue them, because she just felt that my father worked so hard and sacrificed so much, and my father sacrificed so much that and yes, it would have been a nice life to be able to just be able to start a family, but that was not what she necessarily wanted for us. That we studied hard, we were good students, and that she wanted more. We had thoughts about going to college, well, then they decided that they were going to tell us what we were going to become. So it was going to be mostly engineers, doctors. In my case, because I was outspoken, they actually wanted me to become a journalist, kind of a TV news anchor, which was kind of interesting because I always like to kind of represent them talking at, in front of government agencies and at public meetings. So when I went to Berkeley, I didn't know what I wanted to major in, but I did know that I did not want to do, I was good at math and science in high school, and went to college prep high school in San Francisco. But when I got to Berkeley, that was the last thing I wanted to do. I was so excited about being at Cal because I was meeting so many people who just were so different from me. And so I became a sociology major. I took a lot of political science classes, which I was also interested in. But I just knew that what I wanted to do was to serve in some way. That experience from 13 years old stayed with me. And I didn't know that I would ever want to run for office, but I knew I wanted to be somewhere where I was doing something with money and where I was going to be hopefully making a difference in people's lives as a result of that. So my trajectory was one where I majored in sociology. I decided to pursue my master's in public administration. And I became a public health commissioner. This is actually very interesting as we talk about the pandemic today. After grad school, I became a county public health commissioner right when the HIV/AIDS crisis broke. And it was a very, very stressful time. Again, like the coronavirus, knew very little about the virus, except that it was highly contagious, but it became known as the gay disease. And I think I probably spent more time in those early days trying to remove the stigma off the disease because it was a public health issue, and that we knew that it wasn't just a gay disease, and that in order to really protect all communities, we had to really talk about it for what it was, and to get good information out to different communities, not unlike what we're going through with the coronavirus right now. So I became a public health commissioner, and it was really during that time that somebody said to me, we don't have enough money to deal with this AIDS crisis. So could you go to Sacramento and find out how to get some more state money to try to do outreach and education? There was no treatment yet in the early days for HIV/AIDS. And so I went to Sacramento on a fellowship, and I saw all these people who were making these decisions about how to direct money. And they were all from staff to the members of the legislature, mostly white males. Who had no experience understanding what was going on with communities with HIV/AIDS. Certainly didn't look like me in terms of bringing the perspective of being an Asian American. And so I decided after my fellowship that I was going to not leave after my 10 months as a fellow. And I serve for now a retired congresswoman who chaired the Senate Health and Human Services Committee. I did bring some money back for HIV/AIDS and actually did a lot more work after that. And I decided to stay in Sacramento and begin my career in public finance and budget. And it became a really wonderful career, and one that I just truly enjoy. And for any of you who are thinking about going into leadership either in the public or private sector, get some of that financial experience under your belt. Because that's really the biggest driver of many of the decisions you're going to make as a leader. And certainly, as I said, the allocation of resources is what's going to make a difference at the end of the day.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that experience. I think Asians have this stereotype that we're good at math, and instead of thinking as it's a stereotype. Yeah, we are, right. I think we should use that not as like a negative thing, but
Yeah.
as a positive thing, and use it as our advantage, because like you, we do finance and we serve the people using
Right.
our advantage. We're good at math. We should use math to help people.
So, Matthew, I do have to tell this story, and indulge me for a minute. So when I was on the Board of Equalization, it's our tax board. There's 4 members who are elected by district, and the 5th member is the state controller. So I still serve on that board. I've served on it now in different capacities for since 2004. And there was one point after the 2006 election where there were 4 of the 5 members were Asian Americans. And I was waiting for somebody to write the article, you know, Asians flock to the Board of Equalization because they're good at math. I was just waiting for that article. And it finally got written by a columnist named George Skelton with the Los Angeles Times, where he interviewed each of us. It was then State Controller John Chung. I represented the district in Northern California from the Oregon border down to Santa Barbara. Judy Chu, now in the Congress, first Chinese American in Congress, represented the Los Angeles area. And Michelle Park Steele represented southern Los Angeles down to the border, including San Diego and the inland counties to the border. And George Skelton interviewed each of us. And it was about, you know, are you on the Board of Equalization because you're good at math? Now, Judy Chu's undergraduate degree happened to be in math. So that's her love and passion. We all did well in math, but the story that I told was this. Look, I never thought I would run for office, but my background is, and like my colleagues, we're all descendants or of parents or grandparents who are immigrants. The way that our prior generations got a foothold into our economy and society was to go into small business. And if you're running a small business, you better damn well be good at math. And so, you know, it became where, yes, you turn that, as you said, you turn that attribute into something that's positive, you know, and so, you know, and to this day, it's something we should be proud of. Yes, it's a stereotype, but frankly, it's one that, as you say, you use that attribute, whatever you choose to do in your career, to turn it into a positive and something for the good.
I totally agree. Okay, now we're switching back a little bit. So, so COVID has exposed Americans to a lot of pre-existing relevant issues. I think this question is talking about the Black Lives Movement. So what is your opinion on the Black Lives Movement during this very, very hectic period, and how the movement will shape politics in the future?
Yeah. We're seeing it play out right now. I think you will continue to see a lot of engagement by not just the Black community, but really across all communities. You're going to see a lot of participation by particularly young people, which gives me hope, frankly. And I think we're going to see, I hope, a lot more written and understood and learned about the history of this country. And the way it's going to shape our politics is this, I hope. I hope it means that we will see more participation among our electorate, that nobody's going to sit out this election, because people are feeling, frankly, one or many of the manifestations of this pandemic, whether it's losing a job, losing a loved one, you know, looking at being disconnected, you know, from friends and family. And so I do hope that it means that we're going to see much more full participation from the electorate. The way it's going to shape politics, I think, is this. I think it's going to be really urgency for change. We've talked about it a lot. You know, every election is kind of the election of our lifetime. This is truly the election of our lifetime when you think about what's at stake if we don't have a change in our in the presidency. And I think people are talking a lot about that now. They're really focusing the attention on, you know, what can be possible. The policies that we're seeing coming out are a lot. They're very, very sweeping because in some ways making up for lost time, but also making up for the fact that everyone has been hit by this pandemic in one way or another, right? And so this sense of like how we're going to come together, rally together, how we're going to continue to do our part in terms of saving lives, saving livelihoods during this public health crisis, but also being already ready to deal with the next crisis. So we talk about COVID-19 as a public health crisis, but we're already experiencing another public health crisis, and that's the whole climate crisis. When we talk about public health as the foundation of our healthcare system, that where we're focusing on where public health focuses on safe drinking water, clean air, food security, chronic health conditions, living in areas that have high concentrations of pollution. Those are exactly the same issues we're going to be talking about with the climate crisis. And so in some ways, how we're going to shape politics in the future is by the experiences that we are having now with COVID. There's going to be similar experiences repeated if we don't understand that there's a connection between what we're experiencing now with COVID and what we already are starting to experience with the effects of climate change. And so you're going to see a lot of emphasis on the environment, a lot of emphasis on, certainly job creation. That's about creating more stability in the economy, how we look at really protecting workers a lot more so that there's a better safety net to help workers that really are going to help them bridge either losing work or going from job to job. And then also, when we think about just this whole movement towards racial equity and justice, I do think we're going to see a lot more intentionality in terms of opportunities created for our Black and Brown and communities of color. And those are all good things. My big hope is that we can all embrace, the Black Lives Matter movement, because that's going to actually help define what some of the more urgent priorities are going forward. And we need to be part of that conversation.
Yeah, and I think the Black Lives Movement also expanded people's perspective and knowledge of, like what you said, you said that a lot of the African-American slavery history was not covered in history books. But now as I see a lot of young teenagers who post stories on social media that fill the gap. So I think the movement is a very positive thing, that it helps people understand how the racism has effect on America. Okay, because of time concerns, how about we finish the meeting with this. So what is one piece of legislation that was very memorable to you?
So it has to be probably the first policy issue I ever worked on. So as a fellow, I talked about becoming a fellow in the California State Senate to try to bring more money back for HIV/AIDS in my capacity as a public health commissioner. But during that time of my fellowship, I actually staffed a bill for now retired Congresswoman Diane Watson. And it's something that is memorable, and because it's still relevant today. And I was actually not taken seriously at the time, but I'm still proud of it. And I said to her, Senator Watson, I want to, will you author a bill, and I will work on it, with all my heart, that requires all home care workers to be paid a minimum wage. And she looked at me, everybody looked at me and said, oh, you're never going to get that bill through. And I said, but it's the right thing to do. I mean, this is really tough work, and people are taking care of our loved ones while we get to have the ability to go to work. And otherwise, if we can't find a caregiver who we pay enough, it's going to be family members taking care of them, and all of a sudden the family members can't, be participating in the economy. So I authored that bill, and why I'm most proud of that is because it was really part of a movement for economic equity. When you look at who caregivers are, they tend to be mostly women, and they tend to be mostly people of color. That's still true today. And so this has been a struggle and a fight that continues to today. Fast forward, when I became the budget director for Governor Gray Davis, we actually paid home care workers a minimum wage. We had the money to do it. Those who were working under the In-Home Supportive Services Program, all those caregivers were paid a minimum wage, and they actually got an extra hourly supplement to pay into healthcare. And that got taken away subsequently by Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger. And today, because of this pandemic, the tremendous need for caregivers, the idea that many more family members are filling that gap. This has become such an issue that there are all kinds of creative things that are being talked about now that I hope to be part of the conversation. But so it's memorable in that it really was part of a bigger movement. And I enjoyed the work that I did on that because it was a way to also elevate the visibility of all of the diverse communities that were doing this work that really had no voice. And I think as a public official, as anybody in a position to influence policy, that is such a big responsibility of ours, is to, again, where we started our conversation today, to be an advocate for others.
Thank you for sharing the most memorable legislation. I think we learned a lot from you. Julie?
Thank you, Matthew.
Thank you for joining us today and sharing your thoughts on the current issues and the questions that our audience wanted to answer. So thank you so much.
Thank you. No, really a pleasure to spend the afternoon, a little bit of the afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us.
Stay safe.
Thank you.
Healthy.
Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And that's gonna be for our meeting for now. And I put the link in the chat again with all the links if you joined later and didn't see it, and that's gonna include all the social media accounts for each branch. And if you are on board, please stay behind and we'll have a debrief after. Thank you.